What would you say then to someone, I think it was on Ruslan's podcast where he was interviewed David Wood, where he said, well, the reason why I do it in that manner is because it's effective. And it actually, they like it when you challenge them. And I can tell you're very passionate about this, right? Because there's a way that you've been kind of evangelizing. And
the reason I'm passionate is I've actually met Muslims who have come back to Islam because of David Wood.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So,
welcome to the Revo Report. We're inspiring faith with reason and reason with faith.
And they've told you that themselves?
Yes.
Like, hey, we watched this guy, and because of him, I actually...
Yeah, like there's a famous interaction between him and Sheikh Uthman, where he and Anthony Rogers and there were other guys with them, and it was mainly those two that interacted with him. And there's like 2 or 3 videos that are about an hour to an hour and a half long. And if you watch those interactions where he goes to Sheikh Uthman's booth, and they make videos afterward reflecting on it. I watch a lot of their content because I want to know what's actually influencing Christians about reaching Muslims. Even if I don't agree with it, I do consume a lot of the content. And so I'm not speaking as someone who doesn't know what they're saying and what they're doing, right? And
I watched most of their...
And I used to think that their argumentation was good years ago. Then I actually started engaging Muslims and found out that's not true. And especially, as I'm digging into the sources and I'm hearing what Muslims are saying, and then I'm looking at it and no, actually they're right in their So, and actually I remember there was I think he was being interviewed by Cameron Bertuzzi on Capturing Christianity. I think it was an interview like the last couple of years where he was asked the question like, how do you kind of anticipate when you're putting out a video, like what they're going to anticipate, what they're going to say in response, and how do you prepare for that? He says, I just put out the video. I don't think about what they're going to say. I'm like, what? Like, it's foolishness. He says, well, all I care is if they interact with it. Well, okay, so if you think about it also psychologically even like for yourself as a Christian, look, when somebody comes to you and they bring objections to Christianity and you're able to fend off those objections, you walk away feeling
better.
Yeah, you feel more confident about your faith.
Yeah.
Well, guess what we're doing? We're helping them feel more confident about their faith in Islam. Because we use bad arguments, they rebut them all, they walk away, look, I won. And the Christian walks away very frustrated. And anybody who engages with Muslims, unless they're just like there to mock them and attack them, which I don't think is the average Christian who actually has a heart for Muslims, doesn't want to do that. They want to reach them. And they might laugh along at the content and they think it's interesting. They might think it's a good argument, but they haven't actually tried it with a Muslim and they haven't talked with Muslims. And they probably think, well, I can't really use that. And even David would have said you shouldn't. You shouldn't use his arguments. Because he said on many occasions on panels and live streams and things or in interviews, well, he said, people come up to me and they say like, I tried to use your point in this, and but this is how is it what you're trying to use my stuff with your friend? What are you fool? Okay, because it's not useful is my point, even according to them. Yet they keep pumping out the content, and I would say inconsistently. They're also at times they're doing training seminars, they're doing things, or they're teaching Christians at conferences. They're not telling them, don't use the stuff, because they're teaching them the stuff. So my question is why? And also, it's completely unnecessary. Because, if I just say, there are a few major, you could say, categories of approaches that Christians take. One is the moral critique, and that's really embodied by someone like David Wood, and many others who learn from him or have done it. Some have been doing it before him. And that's basically often it's critiquing Muhammad's character, or focusing on ethical issues like the status of women or slavery in Islam or in Islam or whatever, right? Or jihad. And I don't talk about any of those issues because they're extremely offensive, and it's not necessary for me to cause offense and talk about those really emotional issues. 2, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, okay? Not to say that it doesn't apply to certain Muslims, but for certain Muslims it doesn't apply. And this is the issue. I'm concerned about what was actually useful to talk with any Muslim. If you're going to say, well, okay, this is useful for talking to extremists. All right, well, okay, you have your strategy to talk to extremists. Well, you got to filter out who they are before you start talking to them about it. Otherwise, you're going to start using stuff that the average Muslim who doesn't believe in those extreme violent things, they're going to say, you're misrepresenting what I believe. You're not following, I follow one of the 4 madhabs, the 4 schools of Sharia. I'm not a Salafi, I don't follow this. Well, if you're only targeting Salafi Islam, okay, fine. Find out. My point is it doesn't apply to everybody. And,
so just to interject quickly, so you think from their point of view, they're arguing for Salafi Islam? That's what you're saying? Salafi. So what is that in particular? The kind of the jihad,
Yeah, so actually, and based on also like talking to actual Muslims and based on even their explanations to me, right? So I would say, so Salafi, it refers to basically like the first 3 generations of Muslims going back to Muhammad. And that's what Salaf refers to. So they're saying they're Salafis. It's essentially like they're going back to the foundations, okay? The problem is, how do you go back to those foundations and how do you figure out what is accurately representing that? You've got to go through, what sources are you using? Well, the sources you're using other than the Quran, because Muslims don't believe in just the Quran, right? They're not Quran only. They're especially if we're talking about Sunni Muslims, mainstream Islam, they believe in the Quran and the Sunnah, which is the way of the Prophet, which is not in the Quran. It's in vast hadith literature collections. It's in the Sirah, the biography of Muhammad, and so on. So there's the tafsir literature, the commentaries on the Quran. Those are like big categories of literature. That's where you're going to learn about these kinds of things. That's where the sayings of those people in those 3 generations, including the Sahaba, the companions of the Prophet, like would be equivalent for us kind of like the apostles, the first generation of disciples. They're going to have the best understanding of what was meant in the Quran, let's say, or the occasions when the verses were, according to Islam, revealed to Muhammad. So they were there in that context, so they can speak to it. They're the best interpreters. But the question is, how do you access those sayings? You have to go through these collections, and those collections are often by founders or significant religious figures associated with specific schools of thought in Islam. And these are the 4 madhabs, the schools of law, right? And so those schools of thought are after those first 3 generations. So what the Salafis are doing is they're basically trying to bypass it and go earlier, which on the one hand is kind of like it makes sense, but on the other hand, how do you get there? And you're reliant on the scholarship later that passes on those teachings. So if you're trusting that scholarship to get to that, why are you not following it? Okay, that's as best as I can kind of summarize how like I'm going to say a mainstream Sunni Muslim is anybody who follows one of those 4 schools. Okay? And a Salafi is not necessarily holding to any of those schools, and so it ends up, I think, that essentially how the mainstream Muslims see extremists is they are deviating by, essentially they're too arrogant to think that they can figure it out themselves and deviate from an established school of thought. What I'm saying is they're misrepresenting, if we're going to talk about Islam altogether as a whole umbrella, there are different forms of Islam. There are different, even within Sunni Islam. Okay, as I said, there's 4 major mainstream schools. Okay, then there's the Salafis, and they can take on different forms, and they're not all extremists. Okay.
So would you say then a lot of their arguments is a giant straw man?
Many of their arguments are straw men.
Like if somebody told us,
I'll give you a very common example. Okay, so Allah is the best of deceivers. This is the statement that many David Wood and Sam Shamoon and all these guys will make. Okay, what is their argument? They're saying when it says in the Quran that Allah is the best of deceivers. Well, that's a very startling statement. Okay, so how does a Muslim respond to it? Well, they're going to argue about the meaning of the Arabic. Okay, I actually think that the Muslim response to it is not a very good response. And that's why there's a perpetuating
so they keep
and forth, and the Muslims are never convinced. And they believe that the Christians are distorting the meaning. The simple answer, the simple meaning of what it just means in the Quran is, it's talking about people who are plotting against Allah's people, God's people, and God's ways. But God is the best of plotters. It's essentially God outsmarts the wicked, which is obvious. It's like there's nothing wrong with that. Now you might say, well, the Christian apologist is going to say, well, it means deception. God doesn't deceive. Have you read the Bible? Right? Let's not use double standards. Because God deceives in the Bible. right? 2 Thessalonians, he sends a strong delusion. In 1 Kings with the prophet Micaiah, he sends false spirits or deceptive spirits into the mouths of the false prophets in order for them to deceive.
We're equate that with God is a liar, right? I think that's what the argumentation is.
I get it. So my point is, I'm not saying that God is a liar. Can I defend the point biblically with the points I'm bringing?
Right.
Yeah, I think I can. Can I defend that to a Muslim? No. Especially, I'm going to say that statement in the Quran says Allah's a deceiver. Do you think that they see it that way, that the Christian's saying it? No. So I'm saying it's an obvious double standard. And I'm saying, yes, of course I think there is go back to the point I made before. There's a difference between providing a good answer that rationally justifies my belief and from persuading the other side. Okay? What is a good answer for me that I can see God isn't lying and how he can be justified in doing that? Okay, it's an act of condemnation on them, and he's letting them go their own way. Okay, they chose that way. Okay, he's letting them live in it. Okay, fine. But it's not going to be enough for a Muslim, especially if you're at the same time charging the Quran and you're not letting them give their answer. So this is kind of a big irony or hypocrisy, really, is that many of the Christian apologists are